Hi everybody! We just wanted to take a moment to say thank you for watching our little show.
Our little show's a year old now. It's about 25,000 views that all of you have watched. We just want to thank all of you for sending in such wonderful comments that really help us keep it going. And you know, it's been 40 plus episodes. Let's do another one. What do you say?
We've had so much fun. We can't wait to make more for you.
Thank you all again.
Thank you.
Keep spreading the word.
Hi there! Thanks for joining me in my hot kitchen tonight. I'm Wendy, and I've got another really great feast for you to serve up to your sweetie on your next romantic date night at home. Tonight's feast will get started off with a fruit pizza. For the main course, we'll have smoky pork chops with spicy grilled peaches, cheesy oven fries, and broccoli with Dijon butter. So let's get started on the fruit pizza. Now, it's not really a pizza per se with a yeasty crust. It's actually the best way to describe how it looks when it's done. What you'll actually be doing is be making a pastry crust, much like a pie crust. So I have a cup of flour here, and I'm going to put it into my sifter. I'm also going to add about a half teaspoon of salt and about a tablespoon of sugar. And then I'm just going to sift these all together, work those lumps out, and blend them all happily in my nice big mixing bowl here. Excellent. Now the next step is take a quarter cup of nice cold butter and sort of break it up into the flour. Now you can use a variety of tools for this. There's a tool called a pastry cutter. That's a really great tool for mixing fat into flour. And you can also use a nice big fork. It's another really good tool. But my favorite tool of all, folks, is my fingers. I like the way that it breaks the butter up into uneven clumps. And the heat from my body into my fingers gives just the right amount of warmth to the butter so that it spreads and mixes easily through the flour. But not so much that the butter melts and becomes soft and liquidy and ooey gooey. So once I get those little crumbles coated, I start to take it and go like this, rubbing it between my hands. And for some reason, this just seems to do the trick with a pie crust. Distributes the flour and the butter fairly evenly with a minimal effort. I'm going to continue doing that until I see that I've got lumps that are approximately pea-sized to cornmeal sized. So I'm making what's called a mealy pie crust. This is the sort of pie crust that you would put on the bottom layer of a fruit pie or use for something like this crust for the fruit pizza. Milling it together. What I don't want to do is get it overly mixed. So once I see that it's mostly incorporated into the flour, I'm going to call it good. And clean off my hands here. And then the next step is I'm going to need to prepare a little bit of ice water. I'm going to grab a little ice from the freezer and just a little bit of water, maybe about a half cup or so. I'm going to want it to be nice and cold. Then, just about a tablespoon or so at a time, I'm going to add that water and gently mix it into the pie crust. And what I'm looking for is for it just to barely start clinging together, but still being a bit dry and crumbly. So how much water you add to your particular crust is going to vary based on your type of flour, how humid it is when you're doing it, and other factors like that. A little bit more than that. I want to see a little bit more cling. Now the reason you want to use ice water is because of the butter. The butter will melt if you use anything other than ice water and result in a more doughy texture rather than a flaky texture like you're looking for out of a tart like this. The ice water has the advantage of keeping the butter very cold while moisturizing the dough. Give that a little squeeze here, and you want to just see it clean together like that. Perfect. Let's go ahead and mash it all together and get it out of this bowl here. You want to gather it into a ball before you take it out of the bowl so that you don't lose those little crumbles. Those are definitely an important part of the texture of the crust. You want to make sure you get all those in there. So just keep working it around, pressing it until you've picked up all those little dry crumbles. Very good. Take that. Then I'm just going to clear off a little space for myself here. It's time to break out the rolling pin. Now the next thing to do is take your pie crust and slice it in half, and then work each half into a little ball. That's going to help it roll out into a nice round shape. And then the next thing to do is sprinkle a nice little layer of flour on the counter. And I like to gently pat it out first and sort of do the pre-shaping with my fingers. Then use a rolling pin to gently press it out into a nice round, somewhere between 1/4 and 1/8 of an inch thick. Use soft motions, don't press too hard, let the rolling pin do most of the work, and opt for going over a space multiple times to ease it into shape, rather than pressing down hard and forcing it into shape. And then you'll need a tool like a flat metal spatula. You're going to go around the outside of the crust and work that flour under there so it doesn't stick to the counter. And you do this so that it releases easily and is manageable. Now you're going to repeat with the other one. But make sure you sprinkle a little more flour on the counter because the last crust definitely absorbed most all of it. We've got a nice little ball here. Pressing it out again to sort of pre-shape it and ensure successful round rolling. Sometimes it's helpful to give it a little flip so that it gets flour on both sides. And then again, just nice, even, smooth motions, not pressing too hard. Use a gentle touch. When it wants to flip, it wants to flip, so flip it. And just work it into a nice round between 1/4 and 1/8 of an inch thick, just like the other one. Use that flat edge metal spatula. Work it under there, get that flour in there, make it happy and not sticky anymore. Excellent. And then pick one of these beautiful crusts that you just made and sprinkle it with a few ingredients. You're going to want some sugar on there, a nice generous amount. Maybe some sliced almonds, about 1/4 cup's worth. You want these nice and thick in there. They add a lot of flavor and texture. And then just a little love of cinnamon, just a little bit on there. And then take your other crust. I prefer to work with the bottom side in. Pull it over the top. Make sure there's plenty of flour under that bottom layer of crust. And then give it a nice little roll out again. Just gonna kind of pull them together. Might have to hold the top just to keep it from sliding around while you sort of seal together the outside edges. Kind of press in a little bit. Ease the two crusts together. Now I'm going to use my fingers and go around the outside of the crust and just really make sure it's sealed together. I want it to be easy to handle when I go to put it on its baking sheet. Then, just for a little decorative measure, I'm going to use a ravioli cutter to cut around the outside and cut off those rough edges. This is also going to help seal those edges together. And it's going to make a nice pretty edge on it too. And who doesn't like a pretty edge on their pastries? pull it away. Slide that underneath one more time, just to make sure. Probably has enough under there, but you can never be too sure with a pie crust. And then the next step is to bring in the baking pan. So you want to kind of use your rolling pin as a mechanism of moving the crust and move it in one smooth motion. And don't worry if it falls apart on you, just sort of press it back together. It's part of the charm. You'll see what I'm talking about when you take a bite of it. Now this is the interesting step here. Take a piece of parchment paper, or foil if that's all you have, and put it over the crust and fill it in with some beans. Now the purpose of this is to keep the crust from puffing up. It's a little baker's secret for you. Those beans add just enough weight. And the good thing about them is they can be reused over and over again. I'm gonna give that about 10 minutes at 400 degrees before I pull it out of the oven. And now while the crust bakes, it presents the perfect opportunity to make the pastry cream. So what you're gonna need is 3/4 of a cup of cold milk. Pour that into a nice little saucepan. And if you're using whole milk like I am, you're probably gonna need to scrape out the bowl because it does like to stick to the sides. And then you're just going to want to warm that up over a nice medium-low heat, whisking it periodically to make sure it doesn't form a skin on top. Now, this is very similar to other custards we've made before. So the next part of this is that you're going to want to crack an egg into a separate bowl and blend it with about 1/4 cup of sugar and a little bit of extract or liqueur to your liking. I'm going to be using just a little simple vanilla extract. And the other flavor element that I will be using is a little bit of orange zest. The fruit tart does include an orange, so it's a perfect opportunity to go ahead and harvest a little bit of this tasty orange zest. And this pastry cream is going to play the sauce layer of your fruit pizza. Next thing you want to do is whisk the egg, the sugar, and the vanilla extract, or whatever sort of flavoring you're going with, together until it's nice and full-bodied, fluffy, and the sugar's all dissolved. So after I've developed the basic structure that I want to see in the eggs, I'm going to go ahead and add about 1 tablespoon of flour. You can also use a 1/2 tablespoon of cornstarch for this if you prefer, but I like the flour. Blend that all into the eggs, make them nice and fluffy and happy, and get ready to temper your warm milk into them. Well, I can see that my milk has just barely started to bubble, and that's exactly the temperature that I want in order to have a successful tempering process. So I'm just going to grab that milk out of there, give it a little swirl, and drizzle it into the egg mixture just drop by drop here, you know? Just a little bit at a time. What you want to do is warm up the eggs without curdling them or cooking them. And you can do that by carefully whisking in the milk a few drops at a time. It's a really cool process, tempering. I mean, the fact that you're mixing a hot liquid into an egg and it's not cooking and curdling is pretty cool. It's kitchen magic. Once you have all the milk poured into there, you can go ahead and add the entire mixture back into your saucepan. Maintain your medium-low temperature. Do scrape out your bowl because you want all that yumminess in the pan cooking. And continue whisking it. Another thing to add at this point would be just like a little teaspoon of butter, and that just kind of helps to round out the flavors, you know? Adds a little bit of salt, a little bit of sweetness, a little bit of creaminess, a little bit of shimmer to your pastry cream. And you want to continue whisking it until you see it come to a boil. And pull it off the heat right as it starts to boil. But from this point on, you need to keep whisking it. So you can see how thick this pastry cream has become. And if I stop whisking it for a couple minutes, you can also see a little boiling happening. That means it's at the right temperature, so I'm just gonna whisk it for a couple seconds here. And what I'm trying to do is just cook the flavor of the flour out. And I'm gonna pull it off the heat and continue whisking it until it becomes completely smooth and beautiful. Very good. And once it's smooth and beautiful, I'm gonna actually take it out of its little pan here and put it in a nice clean dish. Get it all out of there. This will stop the cooking process, and this will start the cooling process, which is very important to building a successful fruit pizza. Yummy. Wow, that smells really good. I'm just going to clean up my workspace here a little bit, and then we'll move into the second part. Let's take a look at the crust and see how that's doing. So I'll peel back this parchment here. And the bottom and the edges of the crust look great. The top of the crust looks like it could use just a couple more minutes. So I'm gonna go ahead and pull off the beans. It shouldn't puff up too much now anyway. And I'm gonna put it back in the oven for 5 to 10 minutes or until I see the top layer has browned up just a little bit more than that. And now it's time to start preparing the fruit for the fruit tart. So the first thing that I'm going to do is work on segmenting this orange. I'm going to cut off the top and the bottom of it so that it lays nice and flat, and also so that I don't have a lot of pith to deal with on the tops or bottoms of my little orange segments. A little bit more off that one. There we go. And then I'm just going to stick the tip of my knife in there and sort of run it down the side of the orange, cutting off the peel and also cutting down to the fruit itself. Work around the curve of the orange to just expose the sweet part of the fruit. The pith, while it is great because it's full of vitamin C, is also not good for a fruit tart like this because it's a little bit on the bitter side. So for the best flavor and the best texture, you want to cut it all off. And don't worry, you're going to take a little bit of the orange fruit with it. It's okay. It's not really that important anyway. What's important is the presentation of this particular tart. Turn it over and inspect it. Probably find some little parts on the bottom that you might have missed. Go ahead and work those off. There we go. And then take your knife and work it into each segment between the skin. Work it all the way in until you feel you've reached the middle. And use your knife to sort of pop it out. The end is going to be a perfect orange segment with no peel on it. Get the purest flavor. It's also very pretty. And there you have it, a segmented orange. It's interesting how little orange it actually yields, but it's well worth it for the texture and consistency of this tart. The next thing I'm going to work on is this pear here. So inevitably, because pears are so soft and delicate, there's going to be a couple spots on there that aren't as pretty to look at. I actually like to go through before I cut it up and pull those little dark spots off. Little fruit scoop does the job just fine. And the next thing I'm going to do is take out the stem and cut it in half lengthwise. And then I'm going to peel out the core and the little string that attaches it to the stem. Mostly because it's just not that palatable. You know, kind of like the orange pith. It's not inedible, but it's not as tasty as it could be. Give it a little peel out there. Now when you're picking out your pear, you want to pick one that is going to be nice and soft and ripe. If you didn't pick out a nice soft and ripe pear, you could always think about poaching it for a few minutes to make it soft. And cut it into nice long slices, about 1/4 inch thick. go. And now we're down to the plums. So I like to slice the plums in half right around the pit. Just kind of twist it to open it up. And then you need to dig out the pit. And just dig it out, you know? This little tool, the little fruit scooper, is invaluable for when working with any sort of fresh fruit. Comes in handy for taking out bad spots, comes in handy for peeling out pits, coring apples and pears. Okay, that one is in there. Awesome, got it out. And repeat with the other one. Now when you're picking the fruit for this fruit pizza, what I would suggest is just picking whatever is fresh and in season and fairly inexpensive. About 3 different types of fruit. You really can't go wrong no matter what you decide to pair together with this recipe. There we go, that one came out easier. And then slice this one nicely into pretty rounds, again between that 1/8 and 1/4 inch thick. Now when you get down to the bottom, you're probably not going to have a lot of use for that, so you can just set that aside and use it as a little snack or toss it into a salad a little bit later. And there's your sliced plums. Well, that was fun. Now let's go get the crust out of the oven. Give it a little deflation there. It did decide to puff up on me after all. No worries. Now it's down to the last step, the building of the fruit pizzas. So I'm going to go ahead and pull it out of the pan and put it in a nice little serving dish. Pull it over here a little bit closer. Then I'm going to take my pastry cream, give it a little stir, and lay it out here on the crust. I'm going to use most all of it. And just spread it out, much like you would sauce on a pizza. Spread it out almost to the edges. Make sure you show off those pretty brown edges. And a little bit more is needed. You want it to be about a 1/2 inch thick on there. Nice and yummy. And you also want to smooth off the surface and make it as level as possible. And then it's time to start building it. So I'm going to start with the pears because they're the longest and they're very pretty in shape. I'm going to build those from the outside, kind of in a spiral manner. Overlapping them slightly at the center as needed. That's good right there. And then I'm going to take these beautiful plums, place them on top like that. Try to find the right size to fit it. And the orange segments, I'm going to scoot those in right there. This is going to be yummy. And then the final touch, you're going to need a little bit of lemon marmalade or orange marmalade or apricot jelly. And then I want to put it in the microwave for a few seconds to sort of liquefy it. Probably 10-15 seconds, just going to depend on your microwave. What you're going to do is use it as a glaze. Just sort of brush it gently over the top of the fruit. It's going to help to preserve the color and the flavor of the fruit. In addition to that, it's going to add a nice little shine and an extra little element of flavor to your fruit pizza that wasn't there before. Now, like I said, you can use lemon marmalade, orange marmalade, or some sort of apricot jam. The commonality between all three of those things being the color and the fact that there's a mass amount of sugar trapped inside. All these things are very good for your fruit tart. And then it's all about cooling it down. So just stick it in the fridge and leave it in there until you're ready to enjoy it with your sweetie. And now with dessert done and out of the way, it's time to move on to the main event, dinner. I'm very excited about dinner. So the first thing that I'm going to do to prep our dinner is love up my pork chops a little bit. I'm going to sprinkle them with some black pepper. I'm going to keep the seasonings on this really super simple because it's absolutely packed with flavor. Drizzle on just a little bit of smoked seasoning. I'm going to be using about a teaspoon all in all here. And about a tablespoon of red wine vinegar. That's going to really help to tenderize the pork. Not like it really needs any tenderizing pork does, but it sure helps. Once you've done one side, flip it over and love up the other. A little crushed black pepper on there. And I'm going to love up this side with salt. I find it's usually sufficient to do just one side with the salt on the meat. And then finish it off with more of the red wine vinegar and the liquid smoke seasoning. Now, as an alternative to how I'm seasoning this, you can get some already smoked pork chops and use those instead. I really like the combination of the vinegar and the smoke together and the black pepper to sort of round it all out. I like to flip them a couple times just to make sure that the liquid ingredients are all blended together and coating the entire surface of the pork. I'm going to set those guys aside and let them get all tender and happy. Now it's time to work on the peaches. So I've already peeled and pitted the peaches and sliced them into fours. I want to go with slices that are about 1/2 to 1 inch thick. Next thing I'm going to do is take a little bit of my most potent chili powder, this stuff's called pico de gallo, and sprinkle it over the peaches lovingly. Flip them over and make sure I get the other side too. Now, any sort of pepper-based spice will work well for this. You know, you can think about things like smoked paprika or classic chili powder or even just simple plain old paprika. Then, once you've got them all marinated and loved up, it's time to put them on the grill. So I'm going to slide them over here, put them on the hottest part of the grill. I like to do this first, before I even add the pork chops to the grill. There we go. So I'm just going to clear off my space here. Wash my hands really quick. Now it's all about the cheesy potato oven fries. So I've got my potatoes sliced into wedges. I did leave the skins on, and right now I'm blanching them. And give them a little check here and see how they're doing. Oh, those are perfect, just the way they are. I'm going to go ahead and pull those out of the water. Now the whole reason that I even went to the trouble to blanch them was so that they could absorb the seasoning, the salt that I put in the water. See, when you blanch potatoes, it's really your one and only shot to properly season them. The other reason to think about blanching potatoes is it does help to start the cooking process, and they don't have to bake for quite as long. These guys are only going to have to bake for like 25 minutes, whereas if you didn't blanch them, it would take 45 minutes to an hour. Turn that heat off there. And now the next step is to season them up. Or dredge them rather in this instance. So I'm just going to lightly coat them in a bit of flour. I'm going to go ahead and brush off all the excess because what I want is just a little thin coating of flour on there. It's going to help to add a little crispy texture to it. And I'm just going to repeat with all the rest of them here. Lay them out in a nice little circle so they bake evenly. Looks like that's about the last one I'm going to be able to fit in there. Clean the flour off my fingers here. And then the next part is to love them up with a little bit of olive oil. Just a nice little drizzle over the top of each French fry, or oven fry, excuse me. This is going to help to ensure the nice crisp coating on the outside. A little olive oil, magical stuff. And then a little sprinkling of seasoning salt, probably going to use about a ½ teaspoon's worth or so. And by the way, I'm using 2 very small, long potatoes for this particular recipe. Next, add about a tablespoon or two of minced up onions and a clove or two of minced up garlic. Sprinkle them over the top. And then this goes into the oven. We'll add the cheese in a little bit. Got my oven still set at 400 degrees. And I'll be checking on those in about 15 minutes. Let's take a look at our spicy little peaches here. Yummy little guys. Ooh, perfect. Just in time to come back over here and flip them. You want to see some nice grill marks on them. You want to feel them softening up. Those are beautiful, just the way they are. Let's check and see how these little peaches are doing here. Yummy, they're nice and soft, but not falling apart. Exactly the point when you want to pull them off the grill. There we go. And then what I'm going to do is go ahead and turn them into a little topping to go on the pork chops. Salsa would loosely describe the sort of flavor that we're going for here. So I'm going to use 1 green onion and a couple sprigs of parsley and a little salt and pepper to sort of round out the flavors of this. So now that I've trimmed off the soft spots and the roots, I'm going to go ahead and slice these green onions up really quick here. Nice little rounds. Just love the way these look. And the flavor is nice and mild. It's perfect to complement this fresh parsley and these grilled peaches. Now, start by slicing these into big chunks. They're still going to be hot, but that's fine. It's actually going to help to enhance the flavor because it's going to help the salt to absorb. Love it up with just a little sprinkling of salt. A little bit of pepper. Then you run your knife through it a few times, just sort of blend all those elements together. I love the crisp texture that the peaches take on. Hold it, blend it, love it. And really that's it. Set that aside. It's okay if it cools down, because the flavors will just blend together as it cools down. And besides that, you're going to put it on top of a piping hot pork chop. So heat's really not going to be an issue at that point. That's good, just to sit there happily until the rest of dinner is ready. And it's time for the next phase of the cheesy oven fries. So basically what I'm looking for is for the flour to be completely absorbed by the olive oil before I go ahead and add the cheese. And in this instance, I'm using a nice chipotle cheddar. Any sort of cheese that melts well will do great with this dish. I especially like something with a little spice to it. That's why I'm using chipotle cheddar. Monterey Jack would be really good as well. And just nestle it in around the potatoes. The other thing to think about here is to crank your oven's temperature up. So I'm going to crank mine up to 450 because I really want this cheese to melt and maybe get a little crisping on the outside of it for the theatrical effect. Another 10 to 15 minutes on those. And now that the potatoes are in their final phase, you should be good to go ahead on your pork chops. Now one more flip just to make sure they're sufficiently loved up. Then place them on the hottest part of your grill. If you have an adjustable grill, adjust it to a slightly lower than the highest temperature. And if not, just move it to a little bit cooler section of the grill for the maximum flavor out of your pork chop. And now we can get the vegetables started as well. The broccoli with Dijon butter. So the first part of the broccoli is really simple. You're just going to do a little sautéing action. Add the broccoli and some olive oil or butter if you like. Give a little toss here. Make those bad boys pop. Season them up with a little salt and pepper. Draw the flavor out of them, you know. And give them a few minutes here until you start to see the color brighten before you move on to the next step. All right, these have brightened up just the way I want to see them. They're not hot yet, so it's perfect point to go ahead and add about 1 ounce of white wine. Quickly cover them with a lid. What we're gonna do is let the steam sort of penetrate the broccoli and cook it, make it just perfect. Check back on it in a couple minutes. Well, I love how I'm seeing the juices come to the surface here. That usually means that the meat is ready to flip. Let's take a little look-see here. Ooh, yummy. Look at that beautiful color. Pork responds really well to a slightly lower temperature than, say, beef. Comes out with that beautiful texture. So this broccoli is looking just about right. I'm gonna quickly whip up a little compound butter here. Compound butter is just a fancy way to say butter that has stuff in it. And in this case, it's gonna have about a clove of garlic and a nice little dollop of Dijon style mustard. And I actually prefer to work with colder butter on this because when it hits the vegetables, it melts and shines them up, and it doesn't really separate out like butter can if it's subjected to too high of a temperature. So if you use the cold butter, you get a better result. That's all I'm trying to say. And interestingly enough, cold butter mixes just as well as soft butter. All right, let's go ahead and drop that in there. Yumminess, absolute yumminess. A little toss here. Oh, and by the way, you don't want to add the butter until most of the wine is cooked out. You want very little wine in there. And as the butter's melting, you can go ahead and pull the broccoli off the heat and let the residual heat in the pan and the broccoli do the rest of the melting for you. This is really more of a garnish than anything. There we go. Now I'm gonna get this yumminess out of the pan and onto my plates here. Oh, that smells really good. I'm liking that. My sweetie's gonna be really happy with this. Yum. And then let's get the pork chops off the grill as well. Nestle those in there. Top them off in just a moment. And retrieve the potatoes right now. Oh, wow, now these look amazing. Oh, I love the crunchy cheese. That's a nice touch. Rest these potatoes out. Wow, they're coming out in all sorts of fun ways there. Beautiful. And then the final touch, a little bit of the peach salsa. Spoon it over the top. Garnish the pork chops lovingly, thinking of your amazing romantic evening and the delicious feast that you're about to have. Now you just whipped up a delicious romantic feast with the right blend of sugar and spice. It's sure to please your sweetie. Now pair this up with a red or a white wine. Think of something with notes of toastiness, maybe a little creaminess, so a Chardonnay or a nice Merlot. Now call in your sweetie. Goodbye, apron. Hi.
Hi.
Hey, I made dinner.
Wow, what's this one? Look at this.
Hey! Yeah.
No. My lady.
Thank you, sir.
Absolutely delicious.
Grilled peach on top of grilled pork chops. Oh yeah, crispy cheese. Ha 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 ha.
Oh my goodness, that's so good.
Yay.
This is such a hot kitchen.
Yay. So thanks for joining me in my hot kitchen tonight. Have fun turning up the heat in your kitchen, and I'll see you next week. Night night.